All right, let's stick with Europe a little bit for the program. British Prime Minister David Cameron preparing for his crunch reform talks in Brussels ahead of an in-out referendum. Some British farmers, however, traditionally pro-EU, thanks to the big multi-billion-dollar subsidies, now think it's time to cut loose, complaining of too much red tapeism.
After decades of generous subsidies from Brussels, some British farmers are starting to think the unthinkable, that they might be better off outside the European Union. Farmers were strong supporters of EU membership when Britain last voted on it in 1975. And for years they flourished as funds flowed into the sector to encourage ever-rising production. But now, with Prime Minister David Cameron preparing to call an in or out referendum on Britain's EU membership, possibly as early as June, some farmers feel the benefits of belonging to the Brussels Club are far less compelling than a generation ago. Robert Law, who farms 4,000 acres of arable land at Thrift Farm in Hertfordshire, says red tape and EU directives have stifled British farming.
When we joined Europe, we went into a free trading area. There were just 9 members. Now there's 27. And what's trying to happen is the EU is trying to make one size fits all, and it doesn't work.
Law breeds more than 2,500 sheep and blames the EU for oppressive bureaucracy and crippling paperwork.
When I came into farming, I spent 95% of my time out on the farm working. Now I spend 95% of my time administrating and far too much hours of the night and hours of the day attending to administration in the office.
British farmers receive £3 billion a year in support payments from the EU, which makes up about 55% of total income from farming, according to government figures.
And every farm would admit, yes, they do help us, but they come at a big price of a lot of regulation. And because we're all in this system, we're all receiving payments, it's sort of built into our financial return. It's all part of the system now.
George Chester, a partner at Stuart & Parker, an estate agent which has 100 years of experience in farm management, says that if Britain lost subsidies from Europe, the government would have to make up the shortfall.
If we come out of Europe, then the subsidy support would have to come from the UK government. And then we have to compete with the other many demands from the public purse at a time when we have massive public sector debt and private debt as well. And there are many other serious contenders for that money too, if there's money available for the taking. So we have to compete against the education budget, the national health budget, the military budget, the police budget, and whatever it may be.
While full-time farmers are relatively few in number, only about 140,000 in 2014, according to government figures, they wield considerable influence in rural communities, which, come election time, vote overwhelmingly for Cameron's governing Conservatives.
Okay, let's return to Nigeria, where the state of the Naira remains a very serious source for concern. But research analysts at Exotic Partners, a research firm based in London, says the country can get out of its currency quagmire, but the costs will be a little bit heavy. In a report released yesterday, the lack of foreign exchange is clearly threatening the stock of retailers and more critically slowing down money velocity and business activity. Let's bring on the program Ronak Gardia. He's a banks analyst with Exotic Partners based in London. He's joining us to discuss this report that was released yesterday. Thank you, Ronak. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that. Let's start from this 2-page report with a key question. How is President Buhari doing from your analyst viewpoint?
Look, when you look at some of the initiatives that he has taken since coming to power, in terms of fighting Boko Haram, sorting out some of the power issues, some of the refinery issues, clearly there have been steps taken in the right direction. Fighting corruption, another key strength. But I think what is dominating the arguments for Nigeria right now is the FX policy. and the need to keep the FX at the FX rate at 197 and the subsequent shortages that it is causing on the economy is clearly having a negative impact, and clearly, in our view, needs to be resolved sooner rather than later.
Yes, you stated in your report that, quote, you cannot kill what is already dead. Do you believe that the Naira is already dead?
When you look at the black market rate, and that has been highly volatile, and admittedly, the volume on that has been fairly low, but nonetheless, when you even look at the official rates compared to what is being accessed through the CBN window right now, is a fraction of what it used to trade maybe about 18 months ago. So clearly the real economy is being starved of FX. I understand the president's stance that he does want to relocate manufacturing back into Nigeria, but we think this is not the right way to achieve that. Even if you do want to onshore manufacturing, you still have to provide the necessary tools and the FX supply to manufacturers for them to enable to import the machinery, to import other raw materials, which clearly isn't helping. And by creating a two-tier market, you are effectively creating a massive black market opportunity as well.
So, the key issue here, as your report stated, would be FX liquidity. Now, give an advice to President Buhari on how to reflate Nigeria's FX portfolio.
I beg your pardon, please repeat that.
Yeah, I was to say, your report stated that the key issue for Nigeria is the liquidity in its portfolio of foreign exchange. So 1, 2, 3 advice for President Buhari on how to reflate this portfolio that's fast dwindling.
Well, I think you just need to return confidence to market participants, i.e. give them a mechanism where the exchange rate is determined by market forces. If you go back 18 months ago, that mechanism was through the interbank market, and that's what we're arguing. We do think the interbank market needs to be reintroduced. And once that happens and the Naira finds its equilibrium rate, then you will find foreign investors who will look at Nigeria and say, okay, well look, it's a pretty big market. We're able to access the FX market fairly easily, and even if we need to exit, we can exit fairly easily. So we are happy to invest now that the market is a bit more liberalized. But if you keep the market closed, then that confidence will not return, and clearly FDI, as again we've shown in that report, has fallen significantly, and that is unlikely to return unless you see more market-driven policies.
Why are foreign investors interested in the interbank foreign exchange market?
Like I said, it's not so much the interbank market. I think foreign investors just want a mechanism where they can freely trade the Naira and where they have confidence that the exchange rate is being driven by market forces and not preset at a certain level determined by somebody else, arbitrarily by somebody else.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the banks. Of course, the banks are the intermediaries here. They're the engine, as it were, transmission mechanism for economy, finance, money, investment, what have you. So talk to us about the state of the banking industry. You says, well, there's a problem with the banks, earnings look really bleak, and asset quality will deteriorate. That's what your report stated.
Yes, I mean, when you look at the 9-month numbers, you're not seeing the stress points come through. But again, when you go line by line item and on the various balance sheet items for the banks, there's clearly a lot of stress, and it will be difficult for the banks to continue to maintain at that level without seeing significant deterioration. I mean, almost 25% of their books are exposure is to the oil and gas sector, and as we all know, oil prices have come off by 70%. So that's clearly creating a lot of pressure. The other factor that hasn't really been talked about a lot is banks' letters of credit exposure. Nigeria being an import-dependent economy, banks were playing a big part in that, assisting customers to make their imports. But now that the FX supply has been restricted, we do think, a lot of those letters of credits will come under pressure and may eventually default. So that will again be a negative for banks' earnings. Some of the regulatory policies that have been introduced over the last 2-3 years will continue to have negative effect on Nigerian banks. Things like removal of commission on turnover. The AMCON levy continues to remain fairly high. Given that the credit demand for the economy remains, fairly muted, credit-driven fees will also decline. We're seeing a lot of pressure on the treasury yield because of the monetary policies introduced by the central bank towards the end of last year. So that will have an impact on banks' margins. So clearly, a lot of stress points, and it's very difficult to see.
Ronak, I guess that the internet connection is beginning to fizzle out. Thank you very much for making your points, trying to put some perspectives and context of that two-page report released by your firm, Exotic Partners from London. That was yesterday. Thank you very much for putting that into the program for us today. When we come back, we'll go into the world of oil. Iran is going to follow with Russia and Qatar on oil production cuts, but sealed lips from the Middle East country about whether it will join in freezing production. After the break, we'll talk about the world of oil.